Welcome, my fellow lovers of literature and seekers of meaning in the unlikely corners of art. I'm so glad you've joined me again, because today I want to take you on an exploration that at first glance might seem a little unconventional. We're turning our gaze toward The Other Guys, 2010, a comedy that masquerades as buddy cop farce but hides beneath its absurdity a surprisingly sharp dissection of masculinity, authority, and the myth of the hero. Before we go further, let me make something clear. This is not a standard review, not a thumbs-up or thumbs-down verdict on entertainment value. What we're doing here is closer to a critical essay spoken aloud, an intellectual reflection meant for those who love reading films the way one reads a dense text, through themes, symbols, subtext, and cultural resonance. If you find joy in that, if you want to keep walking through films with me in this way, then I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe, not out of obligation, but so we can continue building this circle of thoughtful conversation. Now I'll admit something personal. When I first saw this film, I laughed just like everyone else. The absurd banter, the ridiculous action sequences, the surreal non sequiturs, on the surface, it's entertainment designed for easy consumption. But something stuck with me. Even as I laughed, I felt a tension pulling underneath the comedy, a kind of dissonance between the slapstick absurdity and the deeper, often biting critique embedded in its bones. I kept thinking about it long after, returning to certain moments in memory. Maybe it's because I've always been drawn to works that hide sharp teeth beneath a smile, art that cloaks critique in humor, so the medicine goes down unnoticed, until you realize it's already reshaped the way you think. The premise at first is one we know well. Two cops who couldn't be more mismatched are thrown together and forced to navigate a world of crime, corruption, and absurd circumstance. But what sets this story apart is how deliberately it undermines the very mythology of the buddy cop genre. The film opens with larger-than-life figures, the archetypes of action heroes, brash, fearless, untouchable men who leap from buildings, defy explosions, and bask in the glow of glory. And yet, in a sharp turn, these figures are discarded almost immediately, literally falling out of the story in a way so absurd it borders on nihilistic. It's a punchline, yes, but it's also a signal. The mythology of invincibility, the lie of heroism, will not hold here. This is a film about the margins, about the so-called other guys, who live in the shadows of legends, who do paperwork instead of high-speed chases, who nurse insecurities instead of basking in glory. The characters at the heart of the story are not the action figures we expect, but two men whose flaws are painfully human. One is stiff, rule-bound, a man who clings to order because chaos terrifies him. The other is a fallen archetype, someone who once embodied aggression and strength but is now trapped by regret, a parody of masculinity adrift in self-loathing. Together, they form an unlikely pair, not because they complete one another like puzzle pieces, but because they mirror each other's failures. Their journey is less about solving crimes and more about rediscovering identity, about confronting the absurd gap between the myth of who they thought they were supposed to be and the reality of who they actually are. And yet this is where the comedy becomes slyly subversive. Every joke, every gag is layered with critique. When they bumble through cases, when they argue about trivialities, when they collapse into ridiculousness, the humor does more than make us laugh. It dismantles the fantasy of competence that action cinema has sold us for decades. The car chases, the shootouts, the one-liners, all of it is inverted, turned inside out, revealed as absurd theater. What the story asks us, beneath the laughter, is simple but profound. What does it mean to be a man, a protector, a hero, when the scripts handed down by culture no longer fit? The plot itself unfolds in ways that mock the genre's conventions even as they fulfill them. There are criminals to chase, conspiracies to unravel, betrayals to endure. But every development is filtered through the absurdity of its characters, through the lens of men who are not equipped to handle the mythic weight of the roles they've inherited. This gap between expectation and reality is the engine of both comedy and meaning. We laugh at their incompetence, but we also feel the sting of recognition, because who among us has not felt the distance between who we thought we should be and who we actually are? The brilliance of the film lies in how it teases us with the possibility of transformation. We watch as these men stumble and fail, as they lash out, as they grapple with themselves and each other. Along the way, absurd twists occur, moments so bizarre they seem detached from narrative logic, yet they serve to peel back another layer of artifice. The heroes we idolize die foolishly. The villains we expect to be grand are petty and bureaucratic. The victories, when they come, feel hollow, tinged with irony. And yet, through this carnival of absurdity, something genuine begins to emerge. The men, flawed and broken as they are, begin to reclaim a sense of purpose, not by embodying the myths of action cinema, but by accepting their own ordinariness. It is here that the film resonates most deeply with me. Because so much of life is this tension, isn't it? We are told stories from childhood about glory, about what it means to succeed, to be strong, to be the hero of our own lives. And then we grow and we realize that much of existence is paperwork, compromise, self-doubt, quiet struggle. We are not leaping from skyscrapers. We are navigating office politics, paying bills, caring for others in ways unseen. And yet within that ordinariness lies a different kind of heroism, the resilience to continue, the humility to admit failure, the courage to redefine what matters. The comedy of the story, then, is not frivolous. It is the sugar coating on a bitter pill, a way of laughing at myths so that we might release them. And the film knows exactly when to twist the knife, when to push absurdity so far it becomes tragedy, when to remind us that corruption and incompetence are not just funny but destructive. The major twists in the plot, whether betrayals from within, absurd collapses of competence, or the climactic revelations of conspiracy, are designed not only to propel the story, but to remind us that power is rarely heroic, that authority is often hollow, and that the myths of strength and invincibility mask fragility and fear. By the end, what lingers is not the laughs, though they are plentiful, nor the action, though it is inventive. What lingers is the recognition that beneath every cultural script lies a human being, messy, insecure, yearning for meaning. The story refuses to give us a neat resolution. Instead, it leaves us with the unsettling but strangely liberating truth that the other guys, the ones who fail, who doubt, who bumble through, are in fact the real ones. That in ordinariness, in failure and imperfection, we find not only humor but humanity. And that is why this film continues to echo with me, not because it is flawless, not because it delivers catharsis in the traditional sense, but because it mirrors something true. It invites us to laugh at the myths we've inherited, to let go of the burden of perfection, and to see ourselves in the figures who stumble, who falter, who find meaning not in spectacle but in persistence. So as we bring this reflection to a close, I want to thank you once again for choosing to be here, for choosing depth over distraction, for reading film as though it were literature. If you too find resonance in looking past the surface, in uncovering the themes and symbols hidden within even the most unexpected stories, then I invite you to subscribe and keep exploring with me. Because every film, even the ones cloaked in comedy, contains a mirror, and sometimes it is in laughter that we see ourselves most clearly. The story opens not with quiet introspection, but with the kind of bombastic absurdity that has long defined the buddy cop genre. Only here it is pushed so far beyond the edge of plausibility that it immediately collapses into parody. A pair of larger-than-life detectives stride into view, men who embody every cliché of Hollywood action. Fast cars, explosions, fearless leaps from rooftops, lines delivered with the swagger of invincible heroes. They chase criminals through the streets, destroy property with reckless abandon, and emerge without a scratch, basking in the glow of a city that adores them. The soundtrack blares, the cameras swoop, the spectacle feels designed to inflate the fantasy. And then, just as suddenly, it is punctured. These heroes, seemingly untouchable, make a decision so ludicrous that their demise is not only inevitable but darkly hilarious. With one absurd fall, the myth of invulnerability shatters, leaving behind nothing but questions. Who will fill the vacuum left behind by men who lived and died as caricatures of strength? Into this void steps a pair no one expected. One of them is a man who lives in paperwork, the kind of officer who finds security not in gunfights but in spreadsheets and regulations. He is meticulous, cautious, a believer in rules and structure. The camera treats his world differently. Where the earlier heroes were shot with grand wide angles and booming sound, his life is shown in muted colors, tighter framing, the soundscape filled with the rustle of papers and the clicking of keyboards. He is ridiculed by colleagues, dismissed as someone unfit for the dangerous work of policing. But beneath his stiff exterior is a man who carries his own oddities, whose rigidity hides insecurities that will soon be exposed. His partner could not be more different. He radiates aggression, but it is not the glamorous kind we see in movie heroes. It is sloppy, self-destructive, a masculinity warped by regret. Once upon a time, he lived closer to the edge, embodying the stereotype of the fearless cop. But a single decision, reckless, tragic, and humiliating, defined him, stripped him of credibility, and trapped him in a state of bitterness. Now he rages against the mediocrity of his existence, mocking his partner's obsession with rules, sneering at the bureaucracy that confines them, longing for the thrill of action even as the world laughs at him. The partnership between these two men is strained from the beginning, less a union of opposites than a collision of failures. One clings to rules because chaos terrifies him. The other clings to bravado because regret haunts him. They are paired not because they complement each other, but because no one else wants to work with them. Their precinct treats them as background noise, the butt of jokes, the men who exist only to keep desks warm while others bask in the glory of heroism. Yet, ironically, when the larger-than-life heroes are gone, it is these two misfits who inherit the stage, though they are utterly unprepared for it. The story unfolds in their fumbling attempts to define themselves. Early key events emphasize the ridicule they endure. Colleagues mock them openly, superiors dismiss them, criminals hardly take them seriously. One of the most telling scenes comes when the aggressive partner confronts the ridicule head-on, attempting to prove his dominance in situations that spiral into farce. The camera lingers on his face as bravado slips into embarrassment, as we see not a man in control, but one trapped in a cycle of overcompensation. It is both funny and tragic, a reminder that masculinity constructed on performance alone is inherently fragile. The more rule-bound partner, meanwhile, finds himself battling invisibility. His colleagues see him as harmless, even laughable, yet there is a simmering desperation beneath his calm exterior. He longs to be respected, to prove that his obsession with order is not weakness but strength, but every time he tries to assert himself, his voice falters, his authority dissolves, and the world continues to dismiss him. A key moment captures this contradiction. He delivers a passionate defense of procedure during a meeting, only to be drowned out by laughter and mockery. The humiliation is palpable. What should be his triumph instead becomes another confirmation of his irrelevance. It is in this atmosphere of ridicule that the central investigation emerges. At first, it is almost accidental, stumbled upon in the course of routine paperwork. The rule-bound partner, buried in financial records, notices discrepancies that others ignore. To him, numbers tell stories, and here they whisper of corruption, embezzlement, something larger than it first appears. He tries to share his discovery, but as always, he is dismissed. His partner scoffs, the precinct shrugs, and once again he is left unheard. But this time, something in him refuses to let go. He knows there is truth hidden in the banal world of documents, and he begins to follow the trail, dragging his reluctant partner along with him. This pursuit becomes the unlikely core of their story. Where others chase gunfights and car chases, these two men chase accounting irregularities, suspicious signatures, and corporate loopholes. The absurdity of this premise is played for laughs, but beneath the comedy lies a pointed critique. The real crimes, the ones that devastate societies, are often hidden not in alleys with guns, but in boardrooms with contracts. As they dig deeper, what began as a joke becomes deadly serious. The numbers point toward powerful figures, men untouchable by traditional heroics. The investigation begins to spiral into something larger than either of them imagined, and for the first time, the possibility of real danger looms. Their partnership, though, remains a constant battlefield. The aggressive one mocks the idea of paperwork solving crimes, derides his partner's obsession with details, and insists that real police work requires fists and guns. The rule-bound one, frustrated by years of being ignored, lashes back with his own barbs, mocking the futility of brute strength in a world run by numbers. Their clashes are loud, comedic, often absurd, but through them, cracks of vulnerability appear. We see glimpses of the pain behind the bravado, the insecurities hidden beneath rigidity. It is in these moments that the comedy takes on depth, transforming from slapstick into something closer to tragicomedy. Key developments punctuate this stage of the story. The pair attempt to interrogate suspects, only to be humiliated when their methods backfire spectacularly. They attend a lavish corporate event, utterly out of place, their awkwardness exposing the absurd gap between working-class law enforcement and the untouchable elite. They stumble into danger they do not fully understand, escaping only through sheer luck or the incompetence of others. Each failure should disqualify them, but paradoxically, each brings them closer to the truth. Like fools in a Shakespearean comedy, they blunder their way into revelation, uncovering pieces of a conspiracy they are not equipped to grasp. What gives these events their power is the constant interplay of comedy and critique. On the surface, we laugh at their failures, at their ridiculousness, at the absurd gap between their aspirations and their reality. But beneath the laughter, the story insists on something darker. That the true danger lies not in the streets but in the systems, that the real crimes are invisible to those obsessed with spectacle, and that perhaps only fools, those overlooked, dismissed, ridiculed, are capable of stumbling into truth. By the time this portion of the story closes, the dynamic between the two men has shifted subtly. They still mock each other, still clash, still fail more often than they succeed. But there are glimpses of trust emerging, cracks of respect forming. The rule-bound partner begins to see that aggression, though flawed, hides pain that deserves compassion. The aggressive one begins to realize that rigidity, though mocked, conceals a determination that might be strength. Their investigation, once a joke, has begun to reveal something dangerous. And though they are still the butt of laughter within their precinct, we sense that the story is preparing them for something larger, something that will test not only their competence but their very identities. It is here that the film's rhythm becomes clear: comedy as critique, absurdity as revelation, failure as the engine of discovery. What began as parody of the buddy cop genre has transformed into a story about ordinariness colliding with myth, about fools stumbling into truths that heroes overlook. And even though the path ahead is uncertain, even though the weight of conspiracy looms larger than their capacity to handle it, we sense that these two men, ridiculed, broken, ordinary, are about to become the unlikely vessels of a story that matters. The deeper their investigation goes, the less it feels like comedy alone. What began as a joke about financial records now pulses with the weight of something larger, something dangerous, something they themselves can barely articulate. Their world, once confined to the walls of a precinct that mocked them, begins to stretch outward into boardrooms, luxury penthouses, and alleyways where whispers of power and money linger like cigarette smoke. And though the story still coats every moment in absurd humor, the stakes shift. Beneath the laughter, a darker current pulls steadily forward. The two men, once adversaries trapped in a forced partnership, now find themselves bound by necessity. Their clashes remain frequent, one ridiculing, the other retreating into pedantic rigidity, but their rhythm has softened into something almost companionable. They know how to push one another, how to press the bruise until honesty emerges. And as they stumble forward, each ridiculous step uncovers another fragment of truth. A ledger entry points to a shell company points to a politician points to a corporate titan whose smile hides rot. It is as though the city itself is pulling them, unwillingly, toward its hidden heart. One of the most crucial twists comes when they realize that their own department is not free of corruption. For so long, they had treated their ridicule by colleagues as nothing more than mockery, the cruelty of those who saw them as misfits. But slowly, they begin to notice patterns. Certain officers look the other way when particular names arise, certain reports disappear without explanation, certain warnings are issued in tones too casual to be innocent. It dawns on them slowly and painfully that the very institution they serve is complicit in the crimes they are chasing. The comedy here darkens. What was once just laughter at incompetence shifts into unease, as the very structure of authority is revealed to be fragile, compromised, bought. The aggressive partner, whose anger has always bubbled just beneath the surface, lashes out at this revelation. For him, the betrayal of the department confirms what he has long suspected, that his fall from grace was never just about his own mistakes, but about a system that thrives on hypocrisy. He throws himself recklessly into confrontation, demanding answers, starting fights, burning bridges. His rage is funny on the surface. He screams in meetings, hurls insults at superiors, but beneath it lies the quiet despair of a man who once believed in a myth now broken. The rule-bound partner, meanwhile, responds differently. Where his companion erupts, he retreats into details, clinging to the ledger, the files, the signatures that cannot lie. For him, numbers remain a kind of sanctuary, the one place where corruption cannot hide. But even here, cracks begin to show. He realizes that even numbers can be manipulated, that truth itself can be obscured if enough power is applied. His faith in order is shaken, and for the first time, we see him doubt the very principles that have defined him. The comedy of his rigidity, once a source of ridicule, now feels tragic, the slow unraveling of a man who must confront the fragility of his own worldview. Their investigation leads them into spaces they do not belong. At a lavish gala, they attempt to blend in among elites whose wealth radiates in every glittering surface. They are immediately out of place, their suits ill-fitting, their manners clumsy, their attempts at sophistication collapsing into slapstick. But amid the comedy of their discomfort, something vital emerges. They overhear conversations not meant for them, catch glimpses of alliances forged in corruption, and realize just how far the conspiracy extends. What had begun as financial irregularities is now revealed as systemic rot, a network of power stretching from boardrooms to City Hall. A key turning point arrives when they are targeted directly. Until now they have stumbled into truth almost by accident, underestimated by everyone around them. But now the forces they chase recognize the threat. Their office is ransacked, their evidence stolen, threats delivered not through shadowy figures but through blunt violence. For the first time, the comedy gives way to genuine danger. The rule-bound partner, terrified, considers stepping back, but the aggressive one, fueled by fury and humiliation, refuses. It is here that their bond crystallizes, not through grand speeches but through weary silence. They know without saying it that they are in too deep to retreat. The climax builds gradually, layering absurdity and tension until the line between parody and sincerity blurs. They chase leads through the city, careening in cars not built for pursuit, their incompetence leaving chaos in their wake. Yet, in spite of themselves, they begin to succeed. Their bumbling efforts expose weaknesses in their enemies' defenses. Their mistakes lead to revelations no careful investigator might have found. Like clowns who stumble into truth, they find themselves standing at the center of the very conspiracy they never intended to uncover. The most shocking twist comes when they discover the scale of the scheme. The crime is not just theft or embezzlement but systemic manipulation, billions siphoned quietly while the public remains distracted by spectacles of violence and heroism. And suddenly, the absurdity of the story's opening makes sense. Those larger-than-life heroes who died foolishly were not just a gag, they were a metaphor for distraction, for the myth society clings to while real power hides elsewhere. It is the other guys, the overlooked, the ridiculed, who stumble into truth because they are not blinded by glory. The final confrontation is staged not in cinematic grandeur, but in awkwardness. A boardroom becomes the battlefield, a financial report the weapon, a confrontation of words and evidence more than guns and fists. And yet, violence still intrudes, henchmen dispatched clumsily, fights breaking out in absurd fashion, chaos spiraling. The aggressive partner throws himself into battle, with the ferocity of a man reclaiming a part of himself, while the rule-bound one clings desperately to the evidence, determined to prove that order can still triumph over chaos. Their victory when it comes is messy, accidental, almost comedic in its absurdity, but it is victory nonetheless. Resolution does not arrive in triumph but in irony. The villains are exposed, their crimes undeniable. Yet the system, ever hungry for spectacle, finds ways to diminish the significance. The heroes of the story remain overlooked, mocked even, their victory attributed to others, their sacrifices barely acknowledged. They return to their desks, once again buried in paperwork, their lives unchanged in the eyes of their colleagues. And yet something has shifted. They know what they have done. They know the truth they uncovered, the danger they endured, the bond they forged. The aggressive partner, once trapped in bitterness, finds a sliver of redemption. He is still flawed, still angry, still clumsy in his masculinity, but he no longer carries the same weight of regret. His rage, once directionless, has found purpose. The rule-bound partner, once invisible, finds his own strength. He remains awkward, pedantic, easy to mock, but he has proven to himself that his obsession with details has value. He may never be respected by his peers, but he no longer needs their validation. The closing moments of the story encapsulate the film's philosophy. We see them once again mocked by colleagues, their triumph unseen, their roles as other guys unchanged. Yet as they sit side by side, trading barbs and glances, there is a quiet recognition that they have become something greater than what the world sees. They are not heroes in the traditional sense, not figures of glory or myth. They are ordinary, flawed, ridiculous, and in that ordinariness lies their truth. The resolution, then, is not about spectacle but about recognition. The myths of invincible heroes, of glorious victories, of neat justice have been dismantled. In their place remains the messy, absurd human reality of survival, persistence, and small victories. The other guys do not ascend into legends, they remain in the margins. And yet it is in those margins that truth emerges, that humanity reveals itself, that the real story is told. In the end, what lingers is not just laughter but reflection. The absurdity makes us laugh, but the honesty makes us think. The twists and turns, the bumbling investigations, the messy climax, all of it adds up to a story that is both parody and tragedy, comedy and critique. It insists that real heroism is not about invincibility, but about persistence, not about spectacle, but about truth. And in doing so, it leaves us with a strange, unsettling recognition that the heroes we worship may be distractions, and that the overlooked, the ridiculed, the other guys, may be the ones who matter most. The story would be hollow without the human contradictions at its center. Every chase, every joke, every accidental triumph rests on the shoulders of two men whose flaws are as loud as their laughter and as fragile as their silences. To understand why the narrative resonates beyond its surface comedy, one must step closer, not to the spectacle of explosions or pratfalls, but to the strange humanity tucked inside the characters who stumble through them. What follows is not a gallery of archetypes, but a mirror of absurdity, pain, longing, and reluctant growth. The first figure, the rule-bound partner, is a man who seems, at least on the surface, comically ill-suited for the role he inhabits. He is the type who finds satisfaction in forms filed correctly, in pencils sharpened, in protocols followed to the letter. To colleagues, he is invisible at best and laughable at worst, the kind of man who exists to be mocked in locker rooms and ignored during briefings. His body language betrays him, shoulders slumped with hesitation, eyes darting nervously, voice pitched higher than authority demands. And yet, within this apparent weakness lies a contradiction that becomes the engine of his journey. His obsession with rules is not born of blind faith but of fear, the fear of chaos, of the unpredictable violence of the world, of the messiness of life itself. Paperwork is not just work for him, it is a shield. Numbers, procedures, statutes, these are the walls he builds against disorder, the fragile fortifications of a man who knows he is not strong enough to fight it head-on. What makes him more than a caricature is the way his fragility becomes, paradoxically, a form of strength. Again and again, the story places him in situations where muscle and bravado fail. Guns jam, plans collapse, allies betray. In those moments, it is his eye for detail, his stubborn adherence to procedure, that opens doors others never see. While the world laughs at his timidity, he is quietly threading needles of truth through the labyrinth of corruption. His rigidity, mocked as weakness, becomes resilience. He refuses to bend not because he is fearless, but because bending would mean surrendering to the chaos he has feared all his life. But he is not simply a savant of order. Beneath the comedy of his rigidity lies a man haunted by longing. He wants recognition, respect, perhaps even admiration, but he does not know how to earn it in a world that prizes spectacle over subtlety. When he makes impassioned speeches about the importance of procedure, the room bursts into laughter. When he raises his hand to offer insights, his voice is drowned out by swagger. He lives in a state of perpetual invisibility, and the pain of this invisibility is never far from the surface. The story treats his humiliation with comedy, but if one looks closely, it also treats it with compassion. His arc, then, is less about becoming a hero in the traditional sense, and more about reclaiming dignity, about realizing that his value lies not in performing myths, but in embracing his peculiar truth. His partner, by contrast, embodies the wreckage of myth itself, where one clings to rules, the other clings to bravado, but his bravado is a brittle mask stretched over the fractures of regret. Once he was closer to the archetype, the man of action, the fearless officer who lived by instinct rather than protocol. But one decision destroyed him, one reckless moment so humiliating that it shattered his career and left him the butt of jokes. Ever since, he has walked through life with the posture of anger, a man snarling at the world because he cannot bear to turn that rage inward. His body tells his story, hunched shoulders carrying weight, fists clenched with restlessness, jaw tight with fury he cannot release. What makes him compelling is that his aggression is not strength but mourning. He mourns the man he once thought he was, the myth of himself he can never return to. Every outburst, every insult hurled at his partner, every reckless lunge into danger, is less about the present than about the ghost of the past. He fights not criminals but his own humiliation. His rage is both armor and prison, keeping others at bay while trapping him in cycles of bitterness. Yet, like his partner, his flaws carry within them the seed of transformation. Beneath the shouting and violence lies a man desperate for redemption, desperate to prove that he is not only the sum of his mistakes. The interplay between these two men forms the heartbeat of the story. They are not partners in the traditional sense, no smooth complementarity, no perfect balancing of strengths and weaknesses. Instead, they are mirrors, each reflecting the other's failures in distorted form. The rule-bound one sees in his partner the recklessness he fears in himself. The aggressive one sees in his partner the timidity he despises in himself. Their relationship is built on conflict, mockery, and bickering, but also on the slow, grudging recognition that each holds something the other needs. One needs courage even if it is sloppy. The other needs patience, even if it is suffocating. Through their friction, something approximating growth emerges, not smoothly, not without pain, but with the awkward honesty of two men forced to confront themselves through each other. Beyond the central pair, the story surrounds them with figures who serve less as individuals than as embodiments of themes. The precinct itself is populated with caricatures of authority, the swaggering colleagues who bask in borrowed glory, the dismissive superiors who prize spectacle over substance, the culture of mockery that perpetuates myths of strength. These figures matter not because of their depth, but because of the environment they create, the mirror they hold up to the protagonists. They embody the system that dismisses the rule-bound man's obsession with detail and that ridicules the aggressive man's fall from grace. They are the chorus of laughter that drives the protagonists into action, not because the protagonists want justice, but because they want, finally, to be seen. The villains of the story, too, are constructed not as flamboyant masterminds, but as embodiments of banality. The true enemy is not a gun-wielding kingpin in a smoky lair, but a corporate face with a smile. a man whose crimes are hidden in ledgers and contracts, rather than alleys and warehouses. This choice, while comedic in its juxtaposition, carries thematic weight. It underscores the film's argument that the real dangers are not the spectacles we see on the news, but the quiet manipulations of power we never notice. The villain, with his calm demeanor and polished exterior, reflects the very invisibility that haunts the rule-bound partner, while his untouchable authority mirrors the bitterness that torments the aggressive one. He is not an individual so much as a symbol of the system itself, a reminder that corruption thrives not in shadows but in plain sight. Even the film's comedic side characters, the ones who appear for brief moments, delivering absurd lines or embodying caricatured roles, play their part in the tapestry of meaning. They serve as reminders of the absurdity of the world, the randomness of fate, the impossibility of control. Their ridiculousness, far from distracting, reinforces the theme that order is fragile, that life rarely fits into neat narratives. These figures, ridiculous captains, flamboyant colleagues, absurdly overconfident rivals, are fragments of a larger truth, that the world is a stage where everyone is performing myths, and only the other guys are foolish enough to stumble into honesty. The daughter figure, though minor in presence, symbolizes innocence in contrast to the protagonist's failures. She sees her father not as a caricature of aggression, but as a man broken by regret. Through her eyes, we glimpse the tenderness hidden beneath his fury, the vulnerability he cannot admit. She becomes a quiet anchor, reminding him that redemption is possible not through violence but through honesty, through love, through the courage to be flawed openly. Her role, though small, resonates because it offers the faintest glimpse of hope amid the comedy and critique. Together, these characters weave a narrative that is not about triumph, but about recognition. None of them emerge as flawless heroes. None of them embody the myths we are used to seeing. Instead, they stumble, they rage, they falter. Their growth is awkward, their victories messy, their dignity fragile. And yet, it is precisely this ordinariness that gives them resonance. The rule-bound partner teaches us that even invisibility carries strength. The aggressive partner shows us that even anger hides longing. Their colleagues embody the cruelty of systems built on spectacle. Their villains reveal the banality of corruption. Their side characters remind us of absurdity. Together, they create a world where comedy and tragedy intertwine, where failure becomes the engine of revelation. In the end, what defines these characters is not their success but their survival. They remain other guys, overlooked, mocked, dismissed, but within that dismissal lies truth. They are not heroes in the traditional sense. They are us, ordinary, flawed, yearning for recognition, stumbling through absurdity, finding meaning not in perfection but in persistence. And perhaps that is why their story lingers. Because in their failures, in their contradictions, in their fragile humanity, we see our own. Every comedy carries a shadow life behind the camera, a layer of absurdity and unpredictability that often rivals what appears on screen. In the case of this story, the strangeness of its production is woven so tightly into its DNA that one wonders if fate itself was conspiring to make the film as odd and chaotic as its characters. It wasn't simply scripted gags or carefully choreographed pratfalls that created its atmosphere. There were accidents, bizarre choices, and small miracles that shaped the final product. To peel back the curtain is to discover that the strangeness audiences laughed at in theaters was mirrored, almost eerily, by the strangeness lived by those who made it. The project began, appropriately enough, in confusion. The director was better known at the time for outrageous parodies, and many within the industry raised eyebrows when he announced his intention to satirize the buddy cop genre with a strange mix of action, spectacle, and bureaucratic drudgery. Studios hesitated, worrying that audiences wouldn't understand a film that mocked the very formula it also inhabited. It wasn't until a pair of producers pushed the script into the hands of actors already famous for their comedic timing that the idea began to take root. And here lies the first strange fact. The two leads were not the original choices. In early drafts, the filmmakers considered a much darker pairing, imagining the story as a near tragedy disguised as comedy. When that casting fell through, they turned instead to actors whose comedic instincts could mask the bitterness beneath the humor. This accident of casting, born of rejection and improvisation, would shape the entire tone of the film. From the moment cameras began rolling, the production seemed haunted by accidents that turned into gifts. One of the most famous involves a scene where the aggressive partner smashes his fist into a glass case in a fit of rage. The script had called for him to hit the case with control, shattering a prop made of sugar glass. But in the chaos of the take, he struck too hard, breaking not only the prop but the table beneath it. The crash startled everyone on set, the actress beside him leaping back with genuine fear. Instead of cutting, the director let the moment continue, capturing the rawness of the actors' reactions. That unplanned break made it into the final cut, and audiences later praised it as one of the most authentic displays of his unhinged anger. Few realized it was simply an accident of too much force. Another strange occurrence came during the filming of a chase sequence. The crew had carefully mapped out a car pursuit through city streets, only to find their path unexpectedly blocked by a parade they hadn't known was scheduled. Bright floats and costumed performers filled the road, leaving the crew panicked. But rather than shut down production, the director made the radical decision to keep filming. The character's car swerved through clowns and dancers, the actors yelling improvisations as the chaos unfolded. Miraculously, no one was injured, and the footage was so bizarre it was kept in the final cut. Critics later hailed the scene as surreal genius, a commentary on the absurdity of spectacle overwhelming reality. In truth, it was the product of a scheduling error and the refusal to waste a day's shoot. The set itself became a character in strange ways. The precinct, built on a soundstage, was designed to feel claustrophobic, a parody of the grandeur seen in typical police dramas. But the walls were constructed cheaply, and during one particularly heated shouting match between the two leads, one wall actually collapsed, revealing stage equipment and crew. Everyone froze, expecting the director to call cut, but instead he waved for the actors to continue. They did, improvising lines about the precinct falling apart that were so in character, the audience assumed it was scripted. What was an embarrassing construction failure became a joke about institutional fragility, perfectly aligned with the film's themes. Improvisation reigned throughout production, and some of the strangest facts stem from the actors' refusal to stay tethered to the script. One infamous moment involves the rule-bound partner attempting to deliver a monologue about the importance of procedure. The actor, frustrated after flubbing lines for the third take, abandoned the script entirely and began ranting about the absurdity of crime statistics and municipal funding. The tirade went on for nearly 5 minutes, the crew struggling not to laugh. Later, in editing, the director kept fragments of this rant, splicing them into the film as though they were part of the original script. Viewers noted how natural and painfully awkward the monologue felt, never realizing it was born of genuine frustration on set. The aggressive partner's eccentricities also left their mark. Known for staying in character even when cameras weren't rolling, he spent much of the shoot barking orders at crew members, demanding coffee as though they were subordinates in the precinct. At first this annoyed everyone, but over time it became part of the set's rhythm. Crew members played along, saluting when he entered, responding with mock deference. The absurdity bled into the film itself, lending his performance an edge of authenticity. He wasn't simply playing a man drowning in misplaced bravado, he was living it. Animals added their own strangeness. During the filming of a scene in a warehouse, a raccoon wandered onto set, startling everyone. The director, rather than shoo it away, filmed around it. In the final cut, the animal is visible in the background, rummaging through crates as chaos unfolds in the foreground. Audiences debated its symbolism. Some claimed it represented greed, others survival, but the truth was far more mundane. It was simply a raccoon drawn to the smell of catering. Similarly, pigeons repeatedly invaded outdoor shoots, forcing the actors to improvise lines about sky rats and avian surveillance. These improvisations gave the film a layer of absurdity critics later praised as deliberate satire. There were also moments where superstition crept in. One of the strangest involves the constant flickering of a neon sign used in a key location. Electricians checked and rechecked the wiring, but no matter what they did, the sign refused to stay steady. The director, instead of fighting it, embraced it, insisting that the flicker symbolized the instability of authority. He instructed the cinematographer to frame shots around the flicker, making it an unintentional but consistent motif throughout the film. By the time audiences saw it, the flicker felt intentional, a symbol critics wrote essays about. In reality, it was just a faulty sign no one could fix. Food became another peculiar force. The catering staff developed a ritual of serving elaborate meals at odd times, sometimes offering pancakes at midnight or spaghetti at dawn. This became a running joke among cast and crew, with actors often showing up to scenes bloated or giddy from sugar highs. One day, a prankster swapped the sugar in the tiramisu with salt, leading to a memorable spit take from the rule-bound partner during rehearsal. The director, ever opportunistic, decided to film the scene again with the salted dessert, capturing the actor's genuine disgust. In the final cut, it plays as a moment of character awkwardness, but for those on set, it was remembered as the tiramisu betrayal. Accidents weren't limited to props or animals. During one rooftop scene, the aggressive partner misjudged a jump and nearly fell, saved only by a safety harness that snapped tight at the last second. The panic on his face in the film is not acting. It was the raw terror of a man realizing he had almost repeated the absurd fate of the heroes from the opening sequence. Afterward, he insisted on performing the stunt again, determined to prove himself. The second attempt succeeded, but the first, genuine expression of fear was the one that made it into the film. Audiences later praised his nuanced vulnerability in that moment. He never confessed it was simply the look of a man dangling inches from disaster. Editing uncovered its own oddities. The editor, combing through hours of footage, began noticing patterns: the raccoon's appearances, the flickering neon, the repeated presence of pigeons. At first, he thought these coincidences would break continuity, but then he realized they formed a kind of accidental symbolism. By cutting them together strategically, he created visual motifs that critics would later dissect as intentional. The film, in this sense, wrote itself through chaos, finding meaning in mistakes. Perhaps the strangest fact of all is how much of the film's resonance came from failure. Scenes that were supposed to be slick collapsed into awkwardness. Action sequences devolved into comedy because cars stalled or props malfunctioned. Monologues were abandoned, replaced by improvisations. Yet each failure, instead of ruining the film, became part of its texture. The comedy of incompetence was mirrored by the incompetence of production, creating an authenticity no script could have planned. When filming wrapped, the crew gathered to reflect on the chaos. They toasted to the raccoon, the flickering sign, the salted tiramisu, the parade that hijacked their chase. They laughed at how accidents had become symbols, how mistakes had transformed into meaning. And they admitted, almost reluctantly, that without the strangeness, the film would have been forgettable. Its enduring power lies not just in its satire of myths, but in the way it was forged from accidents, chaos, and the refusal to hide imperfection. In retrospect, the strangest fact is how seamlessly life imitated art. A story about incompetence, failure, and absurdity was itself born of incompetence, failure, and absurdity. The other guys who stumbled through the plot had their mirrors in the crew who stumbled through production, each mistake another layer of comedy and critique. And perhaps that is why the film endures, because it was never just scripted laughter, but real lived chaos stitched together into a work that tells the truth. That sometimes the funniest, most resonant stories are not the ones carefully planned, but the ones discovered by accident, in the middle of disaster, when everything goes wrong and somehow becomes right. There are films that announce themselves loudly, that strut across the screen with the certainty of myth, daring you to take them at face value. And then there are films like this one, where the laughter, the pratfalls, the absurdity are a mask for something sharper, a blade hidden inside the slapstick cutting deeper than expected. To look at the events of the story critically is to peel back the bright comedy and see the darker textures beneath, to trace how each ridiculous twist contributes not just to humor, but to meaning. What follows is not a recounting of events as entertainment, but a meditation on how they function as commentary, as satire, as symbols that resonate far beyond their surface. The film begins with bombast, and critically this is no accident. The opening sequence of the super cops, those larger-than-life figures who embody every cliché of the action genre, is staged with intentional excess. Cars fly, bullets spray, skyscrapers tremble, every image is dialed up to parody. But the punchline is swift and brutal. The heroes die in the most absurd way possible, leaping to their doom under the delusion of invincibility. From a critical perspective, this is the dismantling of a myth. Action cinema has long sold audiences on the fantasy of immortality, of men who survive anything, of masculine bravado triumphing over physics itself. By killing its archetypal heroes in the opening act, the film announces its thesis. The myths we consume are lies, and clinging to them leads not to glory but to absurd death. Critics at the time were divided. Some saw it as tasteless parody, others as brilliant deconstruction, but few could deny its impact. The event forced audiences to laugh and flinch at the same time, unsettling them with the collapse of a fantasy they thought safe. Into that vacuum stumble the protagonists, and their introduction is itself a critical event. They are framed not in wide, heroic shots but in cramped offices, bathed not in golden light but in the pale glow of fluorescent bulbs. One is obsessed with paperwork, the other with posturing, and both are ridiculed by colleagues. Their marginalization is not simply set up for comedy, it is commentary on invisibility. In a world that idolizes spectacle, those who maintain the machinery of order, the ones buried in spreadsheets, the ones living in shame, are dismissed. Critics who read the film through a Marxist lens saw in this introduction a critique of labor division. The glorious work of action is rewarded, while the unglamorous but necessary work of maintenance is ridiculed. From a cultural perspective, it resonated with audiences who felt unseen in their own lives, trapped in paperwork while others basked in recognition. The laughter here was laced with identification. The discovery of the conspiracy, through paperwork of all things, is another event ripe for critical analysis. It is, on the surface, absurd. Two incompetent detectives stumble into truth not through heroics, but through financial irregularities buried in ledgers. Yet this absurdity is precisely the point. The film shifts the locus of crime from alleys to boardrooms, from bullets to contracts. It insists that the real dangers to society are not the flamboyant villains of genre myth, but the quiet manipulations of finance and power. Critics of capitalism seized on this point, arguing that the film used comedy to smuggle in a serious critique. That systemic corruption is invisible precisely because society is distracted by spectacles of violence. The discovery scene, then, is more than a gag. It is a pivot, reorienting the audience from action to satire, from laughter to recognition. The betrayal at the safe house provides another layer of meaning. Narratively, it functions as escalation, forcing the protagonists into greater danger. Critically, it functions as a commentary on trust and institutional fragility. Men who should be allies are revealed as compromised, their loyalty bought or broken. This event echoes through feminist and psychoanalytic readings as well. The shattering of trust parallels the shattering of identity, the realization that authority figures, the fatherly precinct, the protective system, cannot be relied upon. Audiences laughed at the bumbling incompetence of the protagonists, but the betrayal underneath the comedy gnawed at something deeper, the recognition that institutions are rarely as solid as we want to believe. The gala scene where the protagonists infiltrate the world of elites is perhaps the most overtly satirical event. Their ill-fitting suits, their awkward manners, their clumsy improvisations, all highlight their alienation in spaces of power. Critics have compared the scene to Brechtian theater, where alienation is used deliberately to expose social absurdity. The protagonist's discomfort becomes the audience's lens, allowing us to see the grotesque opulence of the wealthy for what it is. Absurd theater built on exploitation. The comedy of their awkwardness distracts us long enough to make us laugh, but beneath the laughter lies unease. We recognize the gap between ordinary workers and untouchable elites, a gap so wide it can only be bridged through farce. The escalation into direct danger, the ransacking of their office, the threats from powerful figures, is another moment where comedy brushes against tragedy. On screen, it is played for laughs. The bumbling detectives shocked that anyone takes them seriously. But critically, it is the moment when invisibility transforms into threat. Power does not notice the powerless until it must. Once they stumble close enough to truth, the system responds with force. Here, the film exposes another uncomfortable reality. Those who serve systems faithfully are invisible, but the moment they challenge them, they become enemies. Critics noted how this mirrored whistleblower narratives, where ordinary workers become targets simply for uncovering what was always hidden in plain sight. The rooftop chase sequence, though staged with slapstick chaos, carries symbolic weight. The protagonists scramble across architecture that seems determined to betray them, tiles slipping, harnesses catching, bodies flailing. Their incompetence is funny, but the city itself becomes antagonist, its geometry hostile, its surfaces treacherous. Critics saw in this sequence a metaphor for inevitability. No matter how hard they run, the structures of power, the city, the system conspire against them. Their survival, then, is not triumph but accident, a reminder of human fragility amid institutional weight. The confrontation with the corporate villain, staged in a boardroom rather than an alley, is perhaps the film's boldest inversion of genre expectation. Instead of guns blazing, the climax revolves around evidence, signatures, financial manipulation. Comedy persists, the protagonists trip over words, stumble through threats, but the underlying critique is sharp. The villain is untouchable not because he is strong, but because he is banal. He smiles, he shakes hands, he manipulates contracts, and in doing so he wreaks more havoc than any gun-toting gangster. Critics praised this choice as a deliberate rejection of myth, forcing audiences to recognize that systemic crime hides in plain sight, clothed in respectability. The final battle, chaotic and messy, underscores the film's refusal to grant neat catharsis. The protagonists fight, flail, and stumble, their victory more accident than triumph. Critics of traditional masculinity hailed this as a deconstruction of the hero myth. The protagonists win not because they embody strength, but because they persist in their ordinariness. Their survival is unglamorous, their resolution unsatisfying, and yet it feels more honest than the slick finales of traditional action films. Audiences laughed, but the laughter was uneasy, recognition disguised as humor. The resolution, where the protagonists return to invisibility, mocked once again by colleagues, is the film's final critical statement. After everything, they are still other guys, overlooked, ridiculed, forgotten. Their victory is unrecognized, their dignity fragile, their lives unchanged. Critics interpreted this ending in multiple ways. Some saw it as nihilistic, a reminder that systems never reward the ordinary. Others saw it as liberating, a rejection of spectacle in favor of honesty. What united these readings was the recognition that the film refused to lie. It would not give its protagonists glory, because glory itself was the myth it set out to dismantle. Thematically, the film resonates because it blends comedy with tragedy, parody with critique. Each event, from the absurd deaths of the opening heroes to the awkward invisibility of the ending, contributes to a tapestry that insists on ordinariness as truth. Comedy becomes a vehicle for recognition. We laugh at incompetence, then realize we are laughing at ourselves. The events function not just as plot, but as symbols of power, of fragility, of futility. Critics across traditions, Marxist, feminist, psychoanalytic, existentialist, found fertile ground here, each interpreting the comedy as mask for deeper truths. The emotional resonance lies in recognition. Audiences may not live through car chases or conspiracies, but they know the sting of invisibility, the ache of regret, the humiliation of mockery, the futility of systems stacked against them. They recognize themselves in the protagonists, not in their triumphs but in their failures. And in laughing at those failures, they find a strange catharsis, not the catharsis of victory, but the catharsis of acceptance. In the end, the critical perspective reveals a film that is not just parody but tragedy disguised as comedy, not just entertainment but meditation. Its events are not random gags but deliberate inversions, each dismantling a myth, each insisting on a truth. The other guys remain overlooked, but in their invisibility, they reveal more about us than any mythic hero ever could. And that is why the film lingers, not because it entertains, but because it unsettles, because it forces us to laugh at our own fragility, because it whispers that ordinariness is not failure but truth. Every film is a negotiation between intention and accident, between the dreams sketched on a script and the unpredictable realities of sets, actors, weather, and time. To talk about this one is to step into a production where the chaos of filmmaking often mirrored the chaos within the story, where strange improvisations and unforeseen mishaps didn't derail the project, but instead shaped its unique voice. What resulted was not just a comedy about failure and absurdity, but a film forged out of the very accidents it seemed to parody. To trace the production is to uncover a treasure chest of anecdotes, some hilarious, some surreal, some strangely poignant, that illuminate how deeply the final film was shaped by the process of its making. It all began with a script that was met with both excitement and skepticism. On paper, the idea of a buddy cop comedy was hardly new. The genre was overflowing with pairs of mismatched partners, chases, explosions, and victories. What made this script unusual was the way it inverted those expectations, focusing not on the heroic detectives but on the other guys relegated to the background. Producers were intrigued, but executives worried the joke would wear thin. Could audiences really spend 2 hours with men mocked as failures and still care about them? This tension defined the project from the start. A tug-of-war between those who wanted pure parody and those who believed, hidden inside the slapstick, there was something profound. Casting was the first stroke of luck, or perhaps fate. The lead roles were initially offered to pairs of actors who turned them down, believing the concept too strange to succeed. In hindsight, their refusals opened the door for the eventual stars, whose chemistry transformed the entire production. From the first table read, it was clear the project would be less about strict adherence to the script, and more about letting two comedians push each other into absurdity. Crew members remember those early readings as half chaotic, half magical. Lines were delivered differently every time, sometimes stretched into long tangents, sometimes collapsed into a single muttered aside. The director, far from frustrated, encouraged this freedom. Find the truth in the nonsense, he told them. That became the guiding principle. Trust that humor born of improvisation would be sharper than jokes polished on the page. Improvisation became the heartbeat of the shoot. Many of the film's most beloved lines weren't scripted at all, but stumbled into existence when the cameras were rolling. The actors played off each other relentlessly, riffing until the crew doubled over in laughter, forcing retakes because no one could hold the boom steady through the tears. The director made an unusual choice. Instead of cutting improvisations short, he let the camera roll, capturing the awkward pauses, the unexpected shifts, the way a rant could stretch until it seemed unbearable before landing on the perfect punchline. This rhythm gave the film its signature awkwardness, its comedy that often lingered just a beat too long, making laughter spill into discomfort. The production design reflected the film's themes in ways both intentional and accidental. The precinct, for example, was deliberately constructed to feel drab, a parody of the sleek, high-tech stations seen in action films. Its furniture was outdated, its lighting harsh, its walls claustrophobic. Yet because of budget constraints, the set was even more fragile than intended. Crew members recall walls shaking when doors slammed too hard, filing cabinets that wouldn't stay shut, and desks that collapsed under the weight of props. At first, these mishaps were seen as disasters, but soon they became part of the comedy. When a drawer fell off during a scene, the actors incorporated it into their dialogue. When a chair broke mid-take, the collapse was played for laughs. What was supposed to be parody became, through accident, authentic. Action sequences presented their own challenges. Unlike traditional buddy cop films, which prided themselves on precision choreography, this production leaned into chaos. The stunt team was instructed not to polish every move to perfection, but to allow clumsiness, missteps, and genuine surprise. In one rooftop chase, the aggressive partner's near fall was entirely real. He had misjudged the slippery tiles, and only his safety harness saved him. His panicked expression, captured on camera, was so genuine that it became the take used in the film. Similarly, during a car chase, the vehicle stalled at a crucial moment, leaving the actors fumbling as traffic piled up behind them. Instead of scrapping the take, the director insisted it be kept, seeing in their flustered improvisation the perfect embodiment of the film's theme: failure as comedy, incompetence as revelation. Animals became uninvited cast members. A raccoon famously invaded a warehouse set, rooting through crates as the actors delivered lines. The crew expected the director to cut, but he insisted they keep filming. In the final cut, the raccoon is visible in the background, unnoticed by the characters, but debated endlessly by audiences who assumed it carried symbolic meaning. Pigeons, too, wreaked havoc on outdoor shoots, forcing actors to swat them away mid-scene. Rather than fight them, the cast leaned into the absurdity, improvising lines about avian surveillance that delighted the director. These intrusions of nature, unintended and disruptive, became accidental metaphors for chaos intruding into order, an echo of the film's central argument. Food also played a surprising role. The catering team became infamous for serving elaborate, unpredictable meals. Pancakes arrived at midnight, lasagna at sunrise, curries in the middle of sweltering afternoons. The actors, often stuffed or drowsy, struggled through takes, their sluggishness only adding to the authenticity of their characters' bumbling. One prank became legendary. During rehearsal for a dinner scene, the sugar in a tiramisu was replaced with salt. The actor's disgusted reaction was so genuine that the director insisted on filming it again with the same prank, capturing his natural gag. In the final cut, the scene plays as awkward character humor, but those on set remembered it as the tiramisu betrayal. Even props misbehaved. One glass case, meant to shatter easily when punched, instead resisted blow after blow, leaving the actor bruised and frustrated until it finally exploded spectacularly. The crew roared with laughter, and though the actor was annoyed, the take was used in the film, his genuine pain lending weight to the comedy. Guns jammed, radios malfunctioned, pens leaked ink across costumes. Each disaster, rather than being hidden, was folded into the texture of the film. The philosophy of the production seemed to be, nothing is too broken to be useful, nothing too absurd to be meaningful. Editing was a monumental task, because the director had refused to limit improvisation. Hours upon hours of footage piled up, with multiple takes of every scene, each veering in wildly different directions. The editor described it as assembling a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape, yet out of this chaos emerged patterns. Improvised rants were cut down into sharp monologues, awkward pauses became comedic rhythm, accidents transformed into motifs. The raccoon's appearances, the flickering neon signs, the pigeons, these were scattered across the raw footage, but when stitched together, created visual consistency. Critics later praised the film's use of motifs as deliberate symbolism. Only the crew knew they were happy accidents arranged with cunning. The music, too, reflected the film's embrace of absurdity. Instead of relying solely on orchestral scores, the composer layered in sounds recorded on set. The buzz of fluorescent lights, the squeak of chairs, the hum of traffic. These noises, distorted and woven into the score, gave the film an atmosphere both comic and unsettling. At one point, the sound of a malfunctioning neon sign was looped into a rhythmic pulse that underscored a chase scene, turning an accident of electricity into the heartbeat of tension. Audiences often remarked on the film's uncanny sound design, without realizing how much of it was born from technical mishaps embraced as art. Superstitions inevitably took root. Crew members joked about a curse after a mirror shattered mid-scene, startling the cast. From then on, every accident was attributed to the curse of the other guys. When storms arrived perfectly timed for rain scenes, the superstition deepened. A lightning strike captured on camera during a fight sequence was hailed as divine intervention, the sky itself participating in the parody. By the end of production, the crew spoke half-seriously about the film being guided by unseen forces, as though chaos itself had become a co-director. The wrap party held in the drab precinct set felt like an exorcism of sorts. Cast and crew shared stories of disasters that had somehow turned into blessings. The raccoon who became a symbol, the salted tiramisu, the broken walls, the stubborn glass case, the storm that arrived on cue. They laughed at how a film meant to parody incompetence had been shaped by real incompetence, how a story about failure had been built from failure. The director raised a glass and said, "We didn't just make a film about chaos, we lived it." And in that moment, everyone knew it was true. What makes these insights so fascinating is not just the trivia itself, but the way it reflects the film's philosophy. The production was a mirror of the narrative. Accidents became meaning, incompetence became revelation, absurdity became truth. The film's humor feels authentic because it was born not from polished perfection, but from chaos embraced. Its satire feels sharp because it was forged in the very systems of failure it mocked. Its resonance lingers because it carries the fingerprints of raccoons, broken sets, salty desserts, and actors pushed to their limits by improvisation and accident. Looking back, the strangest fun fact of all is how inseparable the film and its making have become. To watch it is to see not only a story about other guys stumbling into meaning, but a record of a crew who did the same. It is a reminder that art is rarely neat, rarely controlled, rarely the polished spectacle it pretends to be. Sometimes it is broken walls, flickering lights, and raccoons in warehouses. Sometimes it is salted tiramisu and a stunt gone wrong. Sometimes it is chaos stitched into coherence. And sometimes it is in that very chaos that the truest meaning is found. The setting of a film is never neutral. It breathes, it echoes, it conspires with the narrative to create meaning. And in this particular story of absurd cops, failed heroes, and the fragile line between parody and sincerity, the settings themselves are central to how we experience it. The world is not simply a backdrop for jokes and chases. It is a stage alive with contradictions. Drab offices that suffocate, streets that mock action spectacle, boardrooms more menacing than alleyways, and skies that loom with irony. To explore the settings and cinematic elements of the film is to uncover how every desk, every neon light, every cut of the camera contributes to the atmosphere of failure and revelation. It begins with the precinct, a setting so ordinary it almost collapses under its own banality. Unlike the gleaming, high-tech headquarters often shown in buddy cop films, this precinct is cramped, dingy, and suffocating. Fluorescent lights hum overhead, flickering with the fatigue of years. The walls are painted in shades of beige and gray that drain energy from the frame. Filing cabinets bulge with papers no one bothers to organize, and desks are littered with half-drunk cups of coffee, leaking pens, and outdated monitors. The cinematography leans into this drabness, shooting in tight frames that emphasize claustrophobia, flattening space, until even the characters seem trapped in their own cubicles. This is not the precinct of legends but of bureaucracy, and it reflects the protagonists' invisibility. Their world is not skyscrapers and shootouts but paperwork and ridicule. The camera reinforces this invisibility by refusing to grant them wide, heroic angles. They are shot in close-ups and mid-shots that emphasize awkwardness, dwarfed by the mess of their surroundings. Then comes the jarring shift. The opening action sequence, which explodes into color, scope, and absurd grandeur. Cars leap across bridges, skyscrapers loom in glossy wide shots, and explosions burst in slow motion. Here, the cinematography mimics the language of action cinema, swooping crane shots, pounding score, fast cuts that manufacture adrenaline. But the excess is deliberate, a parody of the genre's own obsession with spectacle. And when the supposed heroes plunge to their deaths, the setting itself feels complicit. The skyscrapers that once framed their grandeur now frame their absurdity, the concrete sidewalks rising to meet them with unforgiving indifference. Critics later noted how this contrast between settings, the cramped precinct and the sprawling cityscape, embodied the central theme, the myth of heroism versus the truth of ordinariness. The city is filmed not as playground but as trap. Its streets are wide but hostile, its alleys narrow but endless. Chase sequences wind through architecture that betrays the characters at every turn. Doors refuse to open, staircases collapse, fire escapes groan under weight. Cinematography amplifies this hostility by using handheld cameras during pursuits, creating shaky, chaotic motion that denies audiences the sleek satisfaction of traditional car chases. Even the lighting conspires against the characters. Neon signs flicker not with vibrancy but with sickly inconsistency, their glow more nauseous than glamorous. Reflections in glass distort faces, multiplying and fragmenting them until identity itself feels unstable. The city is not a space of triumph but of humiliation, mocking the characters' attempts at grandeur. The gala scene offers another striking use of setting. The location is opulent. Chandeliers glitter, marble floors gleam, and guests parade in designer suits. Cinematography here shifts into wide, sweeping shots, emphasizing the contrast between the protagonists and the setting. Their ill-fitting clothes and awkward body language are framed against luxury, highlighting alienation. The lighting is warm, golden, flattering to the elites, but it exposes the protagonists as out of place. Every detail, the clink of glasses, the shimmer of jewels, reinforces the theme of spectacle masking corruption. Critics noted how the setting becomes satire. Wealth itself is the joke, its grandeur so excessive that it collapses into parody when confronted by the clumsy intrusions of the other guys. Warehouses and construction sites, familiar staples of action cinema, also appear, but they are stripped of their glamour. Instead of sleek battlegrounds, they are dimly lit, dusty, and echoing with hollow emptiness. The cinematography emphasizes this emptiness, with long takes that capture the protagonists dwarfed by their surroundings. Shadows stretch unnaturally, swallowing corners, making spaces feel threatening not because of visible enemies, but because of their sheer indifference. The camera often lingers just a beat too long on empty corridors, heightening unease. These settings mirror the theme of futility. The characters wander through spaces that feel endless, battling not enemies but the absurd weight of their own smallness. Even the boardrooms where the true villains reside are framed with menace. They are brightly lit, yes, but with sterile coldness. Tables stretch endlessly, polished to a shine that reflects distorted faces. Windows overlook the city from dizzying heights, but instead of inspiring awe, they emphasize separation, the distance between power and ordinariness. Cinematography often frames the villains in wide shots, placing them at the head of tables, their small gestures magnified by the emptiness of space. The camera contrasts this with close-ups of the protagonists fumbling papers, sweating under pressure, their discomfort amplified by the sterile grandeur of the setting. Critics later remarked that these boardrooms were more terrifying than any back alley, because they embodied the banality of evil. Power cloaked in respectability, crime committed not with guns but with signatures. One cannot ignore the role of weather in shaping atmosphere. Rain is a constant presence, transforming streets into mirrors, multiplying neon reflections until reality feels fractured. It drenches suits, ruins hair, makes chases slippery and dangerous. Rain here is not cleansing but suffocating, an externalization of inevitability. Cinematography lingers on raindrops streaking across windshields, on puddles distorting reflections, on umbrellas flipping inside out in wind. Critics interpreted the rain as a symbol of futility, a reminder that no matter how hard the characters try, inevitability weighs down on them. In contrast, moments of sunlight are rare, brief glimpses of warmth often undercut by absurdity. A sunny day might frame a humiliating event, the brightness mocking rather than comforting. Lighting overall plays a crucial role in creating tone. The precinct is lit harshly, fluorescent bulbs flattening faces, emphasizing fatigue. The city at night is bathed in neon and shadow, an aesthetic that oscillates between parody and menace. The gala glows with golden excess, while the boardrooms glisten with sterile coldness. Firelight, when it appears, is intimate but fleeting, small lamps or candles offering brief warmth amid chaos. Cinematography uses these contrasts to emphasize theme. Warmth is fragile, light is untrustworthy, and shadow dominates. Color palettes echo this philosophy. The precinct is beige and gray, drained of vitality. The city is drenched in cold blues and sickly yellows. The gala explodes with gold and crimson, a parody of luxury. Blood, when it appears, is vivid and jarring against muted backdrops, a reminder of stakes beneath comedy. Critics noted how the film's colors mirrored its critique. Muted tones representing ordinariness, garish excess representing corruption, sudden vividness representing truth breaking through spectacle. Camera movement is equally deliberate. Static shots dominate the precinct, emphasizing monotony and entrapment. Handheld chaos defines chases, creating disorientation. Wide shots dwarf characters against hostile environments, while close-ups linger uncomfortably on awkward expressions, forcing audiences into discomfort. The rhythm of editing mirrors this philosophy. Some jokes are cut quickly, with snappy timing, while others are allowed to drag painfully, transforming humor into unease. This refusal of consistent rhythm keeps audiences off balance, mirroring the protagonist's own disorientation. One particularly famous cinematic choice involves reflections. Mirrors, windows, puddles, faces are often doubled, distorted, fragmented. This motif emphasizes fractured identity, the gap between who characters think they are and who they truly are. Critics wrote extensively about the cracked mirror sequence, interpreting it as a symbol of masculinity shattered by absurdity. But even beyond that iconic moment, reflections saturate the film, reminding us constantly of instability, of identity under siege. Sound design contributes as much as visuals. The score blends orchestral swells with diegetic noise, buzzing lights, squeaky chairs, distant sirens. Sometimes the hum of electricity becomes rhythm, the drip of water percussion. This blurring of sound mirrors the blurring of genre, comedy and critique, parody and tragedy. Critics noted how the soundscape created unease beneath the laughter, reminding audiences that absurdity is never far from menace. Even animals, the raccoon in the warehouse, the pigeons in the streets, contribute to setting. They were accidents of production, but in the final cut they feel like deliberate motifs. The raccoon rummaging in the background becomes a symbol of chaos intruding into order. The pigeons disrupting outdoor shoots echo the theme of futility. Critics interpreted these animals as symbols of absurdity, reminders that the world itself mocks attempts at control. Taken together, the settings and cinematic elements form a tapestry of contradiction. The drab precinct emphasizes invisibility. The bombastic city mocks spectacle. The gala satirizes wealth. The warehouses embody futility. The boardrooms reveal banality. Rain suffocates, light deceives, reflections fracture, animals intrude. Cinematography, color, lighting, sound, all conspire to create an atmosphere where comedy and critique are inseparable. What makes these choices powerful is how seamlessly they align with theme. The story is about the failure of myths, the absurdity of spectacle, the dignity of ordinariness. The settings embody these truths. They refuse to glamorize. They refuse to flatter. They insist on discomfort, on awkwardness, on fragility. And in doing so, they elevate the film from parody to satire, from entertainment to reflection. In the end, what lingers are not just the jokes but the images. The flicker of a neon sign, the rain-soaked street, the sterile boardroom, the cracked mirror, the raccoon rummaging in shadows. These settings haunt because they resonate. We know these spaces. We have lived in offices that suffocate, cities that overwhelm, boardrooms that intimidate. We have felt dwarfed by architecture, mocked by wealth, trapped by monotony. The film works because it reflects these truths back at us, dressing them in comedy so we might laugh, but never letting us forget the unease beneath. That is the power of setting here. It is not backdrop but participant, not stage but accomplice. It mocks, it suffocates, it distorts. It is the silent character always present, shaping mood, amplifying theme, demanding recognition. And in the laughter it provokes, it whispers something darker, that the world itself is absurd, and that perhaps we are all, in our own ways, just other guys stumbling through it. Behind every film lies a parallel narrative, one that never makes it into the script, but is etched into the memories of those who lived through the chaos of creating it. For this film, a comedy built on the absurd failures of ordinary men, the behind-the-scenes story feels almost like a mirror image of the plot itself, filled with blunders, accidents, unexpected turns, and a kind of stubborn resilience that transformed disaster into art. To walk through what happened off-camera is to step into a world where the cast clashed and bonded in equal measure, where crew members discovered that nothing ever goes according to plan, and where some of the funniest or most poignant moments came not from what was written, but from what life threw at them. The earliest days of shooting set the tone. The script, though sharp, left room for improvisation, and the director encouraged the cast to experiment. This was liberating for some and terrifying for others. The actor playing the rule-bound partner arrived on set with every line memorized, terrified of straying from the page. His opposite number, embodying the aggressive ex-hero, thrived on chaos. He'd arrive each morning with a new idea, a new riff, or sometimes no plan at all, content to find his way by instinct. Their dynamic, so central to the film, began to form even in rehearsals, when their opposing approaches created sparks. Crew members recall table reads, where one actor would cling rigidly to the script, while the other derailed entire scenes with improvisation, leaving the room in stitches. It became clear early on that the film's humor would come not just from what was written, but from the alchemy of these two temperaments colliding. One of the first fun facts to emerge was the sheer number of takes ruined by laughter. The chemistry between the leads was so strong that even minor improvisations could send the set spiraling into chaos. In one scene, the aggressive partner was supposed to intimidate a suspect with a threatening glare. Instead, he muttered a nonsensical insult under his breath, so absurd that his partner burst out laughing mid-line. The crew, unable to contain themselves, joined in, forcing take after take to be scrapped. Eventually, the director decided to lean into it. "If you can't stop laughing," he told them, "then let the characters laugh too. They're human." That decision ended up creating some of the film's most authentic-feeling moments, where laughter wasn't just performance but something raw that slipped through the cracks of acting. Not all surprises were so lighthearted. The production was plagued with prop malfunctions that often derailed entire days. The infamous glass case scene is one of the most retold stories. Designed to shatter on impact, the case stubbornly resisted blow after blow. The actor, his hand bruising, grew more furious with each failed attempt. Finally, when the glass did explode, it did so spectacularly, spraying shards far beyond what was expected. The panic was real, but no one was hurt. When the dust settled, the director reviewed the footage and declared it perfect. Raw anger, frustration, and chaos all captured in one unrepeatable moment. That take, born of genuine mishap, became one of the film's defining images. Then there was the parade incident, an accident so bizarre it feels like satire in itself. The crew had secured permits for a car chase sequence through downtown streets, only to discover on the day of shooting that a local parade had been scheduled along the same route. Floats, clowns, dancers, an entire celebration filled the street. The crew panicked, assuming the day was lost, but the director, ever opportunistic, told the drivers to roll cameras anyway. The actors, equally confused, improvised their dialogue as their car swerved through bewildered performers, honking horns and shouting lines that teetered between character and genuine panic. When the footage was later cut together, it became one of the most surreal scenes in the film. Critics hailed it as a stroke of satirical genius, a parody of action spectacle clashing with everyday absurdity. Only those on set knew it had been a complete accident. Animals became an ongoing theme in the behind-the-scenes mythology. The raccoon that wandered into a warehouse set became something of a legend. At first, everyone assumed it was part of a joke or a prank by the prop department. When they realized it was just a stray, the director refused to shoo it away. Instead, he instructed the cameraman to keep rolling. The animal, oblivious to the human chaos around it, rummaged through crates, adding an accidental layer of absurdity to the scene. Cast and crew began treating the raccoon as a mascot, feeding it scraps and joking that it was the real star of the show. In editing, the raccoon's appearances were left untouched, cementing its accidental role as a silent commentator on the futility of human order. Food played an equally strange part in shaping the production. The catering team developed a reputation for unpredictability, often serving meals that made little sense given the time of day. Pancakes arrived at midnight shoots, while heavy pasta dishes showed up in the early morning. The most infamous incident, however, was the salted tiramisu. Meant as a prank, the substitution of sugar with salt caused genuine disgust when the actor took a bite mid-rehearsal. His reaction was so authentic, gagging, coughing, staring in disbelief, that the director insisted the prank be repeated for the cameras. The final cut included that moment, audiences none the wiser that it had been born of culinary sabotage. Interaction among the cast often mirrored their characters. The actor playing the rule-bound partner remained disciplined, keeping to himself between takes, sipping coffee quietly and reviewing notes. His counterpart, by contrast, was boisterous, constantly joking, wandering the set, engaging crew members in playful banter. Their dynamic occasionally caused tension. One story recalls the aggressive partner barging into the sound booth mid-break, commandeering the microphone to belt out an off-key song, distracting everyone. The sound crew, initially annoyed, soon joined in, turning it into a bizarre sing-along that lifted spirits on an otherwise grueling day. These moments of camaraderie reminded everyone that even in the chaos, joy could be found. The director's philosophy was another behind-the-scenes quirk. He believed accidents were gifts, and he treated every mishap as potential gold. When walls of the cheaply built precinct set collapsed during a heated shouting match, he waved for the actors to continue, integrating the collapse into their dialogue. When pigeons repeatedly invaded outdoor shoots, he encouraged the actors to react naturally, improvising lines that later became running jokes. This willingness to embrace chaos not only saved time and money, but also imbued the film with a sense of authenticity. Nothing felt polished because nothing was polished, and that, paradoxically, made it resonate more deeply. Challenges, however, were constant. The budget was modest compared to typical action comedies, and corners had to be cut. Lighting rigs malfunctioned, costumes tore, and the production often relied on guerrilla-style shooting to capture city scenes without full permits. One evening during a rooftop sequence, rain began to fall unexpectedly. The crew scrambled to protect equipment, assuming the night was lost, but the director, seeing potential in the storm, urged everyone to keep filming. The rain turned the rooftop into a slippery stage, and the actors' genuine fear and clumsiness created a sequence far more compelling than anything choreographed. What could have been a disaster became one of the film's most memorable visuals. Editing became its own behind-the-scenes saga. With so much improvisation, the editor faced a mountain of footage, each scene existing in multiple versions, some entirely divergent from the script. Days were spent combing through rants and tangents, searching for coherence. What emerged was a rhythm unlike typical comedies. Pauses stretched longer, jokes lingered into discomfort, accidental motifs surfaced. The raccoon, the pigeons, the flickering neon sign, all became part of a visual language stitched together not by design but by discovery. The editor later admitted that half of the film's so-called symbolism was the result of making the best out of chaos. Critics, of course, praised it as meticulous artistry. One final behind-the-scenes moment lingers in memory: the wrap party. Held not in a glamorous location, but on the drab precinct set, it was filled with laughter and stories of accidents that had become triumphs. Cast and crew toasted the raccoon, the salted tiramisu, the stubborn glass case, the parade that nearly derailed everything. They laughed at how many disasters they had survived, how incompetence had somehow produced coherence. The director stood up and said, "We didn't just make a film about failure, we lived it. And look how it turned out." The room erupted in cheers because everyone knew it was true. What makes these behind-the-scenes insights remarkable is how closely they align with the film's themes. Just as the story mocked myths of competence and spectacle, the production itself was a series of blunders embraced as meaning. Props failed, animals intruded, weather disrupted, egos clashed. Yet out of this chaos came a film that felt authentic, alive, and strangely profound. It was not a triumph of control but of adaptation, not of perfection but of persistence. In the end, the greatest behind-the-scenes insight may be this: that comedy thrives not on polish but on imperfection, not on rigid control, but on the willingness to let accidents breathe. The film became what it was because its cast and crew were willing to laugh at themselves, to transform frustration into art, to embrace the absurdity of the process. And in that sense, the production itself was the truest other guy of all, overlooked, underestimated, stumbling, failing, and somehow, against all odds, creating something that lasted. Every comedy that lingers does so because beneath its laughter something deeper stirs, an ache, a recognition, a critique of the world hidden under pratfalls and punchlines. To read this film as mere parody is to miss its pulse. What makes it resonate long after the laughter fades is the dense weave of themes and the surprising use of symbolism that elevate its absurdity into reflection. This is not just a story about bumbling detectives. It is a meditation on failure, invisibility, masculinity, corruption, absurdity, and the fragile dignity of ordinariness. And the symbols, mirrors, rain, neon, boardrooms, raccoons, are not random quirks but deliberate echoes, reminders that the film is speaking in a language deeper than jokes. To step into its themes and symbols is to see how comedy can hold tragedy in its palm, how absurdity can reveal truth more sharply than solemnity ever could. One of the film's most persistent themes is invisibility. The protagonists are other guys, men overlooked by their peers, dismissed by their superiors, mocked as irrelevant. Their invisibility is not accidental but systemic. They represent the workers who file reports while others bask in glory, the quiet laborers who maintain order without recognition. The precinct itself embodies this theme. Dingy, cramped, suffocating, lit by fluorescent lights that flatten faces into anonymity. Cinematography reinforces invisibility by denying them heroic framing. They are rarely shot in wide, triumphant angles, but in tight, awkward close-ups that emphasize discomfort. This invisibility is both comic and tragic. We laugh at their marginalization, but we also recognize it, because who among us hasn't felt unseen in their own labor, overshadowed by louder voices, forgotten even when our contributions mattered most? Closely tied to invisibility is the theme of failure. From the opening scene, where the archetypal heroes leap to their deaths, the film insists that failure is not exception but rule. The protagonists fail constantly, at intimidation, at interrogation, at action. Their car chases collapse into chaos, their plans unravel, their attempts at authority backfire. Comedy thrives on failure, but here failure is not just a gag, it is existential. The film critiques the myth of competence, the cultural lie that heroes succeed because they are special. In this world, competence is elusive, and survival often depends on stumbling forward despite failure. This theme gives the comedy its resonance. Audiences laugh at the characters' incompetence but also feel the sting of recognition, because failure is the texture of life, the constant backdrop against which we all struggle. Masculinity forms another crucial theme, dissected with merciless humor. The aggressive partner embodies a caricature of masculinity, loud, reckless, defined by anger and regret. His bravado masks fragility, his violence conceals mourning for the man he once thought he was. The rule-bound partner, by contrast, embodies the opposite extreme. Timidity, rigidity, a desperate clinging to order as a substitute for confidence. Together, they represent two poles of failed masculinity, neither capable of living up to the myths they inherited. The film satirizes the cultural scripts of manhood, showing how damaging they are to those who try to embody them. Their bickering is not just funny, it is tragicomic commentary on men trapped by expectations that cannot be fulfilled. Symbolism deepens this critique. Mirrors fracture their identities, reflecting distorted versions of themselves. Guns malfunction, symbols of power turned into symbols of futility. Their very bodies betray them, stumbling, sweating, humiliated. In parodying the buddy cop genre, the film dismantles the myths of male invulnerability, revealing masculinity itself as a performance doomed to collapse. Corruption is another theme running through the narrative like a shadow. The villains are not flamboyant criminals, but corporate titans, politicians, and even fellow officers. Crime here is systemic, invisible, clothed in respectability. The protagonists uncover it not by chasing gangsters, but by reading financial ledgers, by following numbers that whisper of theft and manipulation. This shift reorients the genre, turning its gaze from alleys to boardrooms. Symbolism reinforces the theme. Boardrooms are framed as sterile battlefields, their polished tables reflecting distorted faces, their windows overlooking the city like thrones above subjects. The true menace is not in dark alleys, but in sterile spaces where crimes are committed with signatures rather than guns. Critics hailed this as the film's sharpest satire, that society obsesses over spectacles of street crime while ignoring the systemic corruption that shapes lives more profoundly. Absurdity pervades everything, functioning as both theme and philosophy. The world is unstable, mocking attempts at control. Doors refuse to open, glass cases refuse to break, pigeons invade, raccoons rummage, neon lights flicker without reason. These accidents, many of them born of production mishaps, became symbolic in the final film. They insist that the universe itself is absurd, that control is illusion, that chaos will always intrude. The opening deaths of the heroes embody this absurdity most sharply. Men so blinded by delusions of invincibility, they leap to their doom, undone not by villains but by gravity. Critics compared this to the existential absurdity of Camus, where human attempts at meaning are constantly mocked by indifferent reality. Comedy becomes the only possible response, laughter the only shield against chaos. Yet amid invisibility, failure, and absurdity lies another theme, persistence. The protagonists never truly succeed in the way myths demand, but they refuse to stop. They bicker, they stumble, they fail, but they keep moving. Their survival is messy, humiliating, unrecognized, but it is survival nonetheless. This persistence, ordinary and unglamorous, becomes a kind of heroism. It redefines what victory means, shifting it from spectacle to endurance. Symbolism underscores this persistence. Rain falls endlessly, drowning but never destroying. Neon flickers, unstable but unextinguished. Firelight appears briefly, fragile but luminous, a reminder that warmth exists even in chaos. These symbols echo the film's deeper argument, that dignity is not found in perfection, but in persistence, not in glory, but in survival. Symbolism saturates the film with layers that critics continue to dissect. Mirrors, as mentioned, represent fractured identity, the gap between self-perception and reality. The cracked mirror, in particular, became iconic, reflecting the daughter's face split into fragments, symbolizing not just identity but trust and connection shattered. Rain, ever present, symbolizes inevitability, the inescapable weight of failure and futility. It drowns but also reflects, creating distorted images that remind us of instability. Neon lights symbolize false promises, dazzling but sickly, illuminating nothing. Their flickering becomes a motif of instability, of systems that cannot be trusted. The raccoon, accidental mascot of the production, became a symbol of absurdity or survival, depending on interpretation, life persisting indifferently while humans flail. Firelight symbolizes intimacy, fragile but luminous, appearing in rare moments of connection between characters. The boardroom, sterile and polished, symbolizes the banality of systemic evil, crime cloaked in respectability. Each symbol layers meaning, turning comedy into critique, parody into reflection. Critical readings expand these symbols further. Psychoanalytic interpretations emphasize mirrors as metaphors for fractured masculinity and unresolved identity. Feminist readings highlight the daughter figure as a counterpoint, embodying resilience and perspective that the men lack. Marxist critiques emphasize the boardrooms and financial ledgers, reading the film as satire of capitalist corruption and the invisibility of labor. Existentialist readings emphasize absurdity, persistence, and futility, connecting the raccoon, the pigeons, and the flickering lights to a philosophy of endurance without resolution. Each reading enriches the film, proving that its symbols are not mere decoration but fertile ground for interpretation. Even sound carries symbolic weight. The buzz of fluorescent lights becomes oppressive, a reminder of suffocation. The drip of rain becomes rhythm, inevitability made audible. The squeak of chairs, the hum of traffic, the flicker of neon, all are woven into the soundscape, blurring diegetic and non-diegetic, reminding us that the world itself mocks attempts at control. The music, blending orchestral swells with mundane noises, symbolizes the collapse of spectacle into ordinariness. Critics noted how the score refuses to flatter, insisting instead on unease. These themes and symbols connect seamlessly to plot and characters. The protagonists embody invisibility, failure, and persistence. Their world embodies absurdity and corruption. Their interactions embody the critique of masculinity. Every event from the opening deaths to the sterile boardrooms reinforces these themes. Comedy and critique intertwine so tightly that one cannot separate them. Laughter becomes recognition, absurdity becomes truth, parody becomes philosophy. In the end, the film insists that ordinariness, though mocked, is truth. The other guys remain invisible, their victories unrecognized, their dignity fragile. But through invisibility, failure, absurdity, and persistence, they reveal more about humanity than myths of invincible heroes ever could. The symbols, mirrors, rain, neon, raccoons, linger because they are not just cinematic flourishes but reflections of our own lives. We, too, are fractured in mirrors, drowned by inevitability, distracted by false lights, mocked by absurd intrusions. And we, too, persist. That is why the film endures, not because it entertains, though it does, but because it unsettles, not because it glorifies, but because it reveals. In its themes and symbols, it tells the truth. That life is absurd, that failure is constant, that invisibility is real, and that dignity lies not in perfection but in persistence. And so the laughter fades into recognition, and recognition lingers into resonance. Comedy becomes critique, absurdity becomes reflection, and the story of other guys becomes, unmistakably, a story of us. The end of a conversation about a film always feels a little bittersweet, doesn't it? Like walking out of a theater after the lights come up, when your eyes still sting from the darkness, and your mind hums with what you've just witnessed. You carry with you fragments, the lines that made you laugh, the images that unsettled you, the questions that won't leave. And so it is here, as we draw our journey through this story to a close. We've walked through laughter and failure, through satire and symbolism, through the dingy precincts and sterile boardrooms and rain-soaked streets that together built a comedy more profound than its surface suggested. Now it's time to gather those fragments, to weave them once more into something whole, so that what lingers isn't just memory but meaning. We began, you'll recall, with invisibility. Two men dismissed as irrelevant, shoved to the margins, their labor mocked, their identities invisible. Their precinct was no cathedral of justice, but a drab office suffocating under fluorescent lights. From the first frames, the film insisted that its story wasn't about heroes bathed in glory, but about the other guys, the ones usually blurred in the background, while spectacle roared in the foreground. This invisibility was both the source of humor and the foundation of critique. We laughed at their awkwardness, their humiliation, their petty squabbles, but we also recognized ourselves in them. Because who among us hasn't felt unseen, our efforts overshadowed, our dignity eroded by louder voices? And then there was failure. If invisibility was their condition, failure was their rhythm. They failed constantly, and the film made no attempt to hide it. Every chase unraveled into chaos, every attempt at intimidation dissolved into awkwardness, every plan collapsed under the weight of incompetence. Yet this was not just comedy for its own sake. It was critique, the dismantling of the cultural lie that competence and control define heroism. Here, failure was the rule, not the exception. Survival was messy, humiliating, unglamorous, but it was survival nonetheless. In their failures, the protagonists mirrored the failures that define ordinary life, reminding us that dignity is found not in perfection but in persistence. Masculinity became another theme, dissected with merciless precision. One man clung to rigidity, his obsession with paperwork masking fear and insecurity. The other clung to bravado, his anger a brittle mask for regret and mourning. Together they embodied two poles of failed masculinity, trapped by myths they could not fulfill. Their bickering was funny, yes, but it was also tragicomic commentary on cultural scripts of manhood, scripts that wound the men who try to embody them. Mirrors cracked, guns misfired, bodies stumbled. Each symbol mocked the myth of invulnerability, revealing masculinity itself as a performance doomed to collapse. Critics saw in this not just parody but philosophy, a sharp satire of the burdens myths place on men and the quiet dignity found in abandoning them. We cannot forget corruption, that shadow woven into every frame. The true villains were not flamboyant gangsters in smoky lairs, but corporate titans and politicians in sterile boardrooms. Crime was systemic, invisible, clothed in respectability. Financial ledgers whispered louder than gunfire. The polished boardroom table, reflecting distorted faces, became more terrifying than any dark alley. This inversion was deliberate. The film insisted that society obsesses over street crime because it is visible, while ignoring systemic corruption because it is banal.